Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm good, Jana. How are you keeping?
I'm great. I'm great. Well, here we are. We're what else would we be doing on a Saturday evening other than reviewing the recent cast report, right?
Mm, absolutely.
A lot of our followers have been asking about, our views on the cast report and what it means and what we will be doing for the children in Ireland. So it's very timely to have this chat. And before we start, I know we've done discussions before, Lisa, but for anyone who hasn't seen our discussions or met you yet, Lisa Mullen is on the Natural Women's Council. She's a former solicitor. You ran your own law firm and now a fully qualified professional acupuncturist treating patients with natural health. So fantastic. So
That's
yeah,
it.
we've gone through the cast report. Now it's how many pages did you say it's over?
It's just under, I think it's 388 in total.
Yeah, we haven't read the whole 388 pages, but
No.
we've skimmed it over, done some speed reading, and pulled out some high level information, which we'll talk through tonight. So I'll do a shared screen so we can let everyone know where to find the report, and we'll just touch on
Yeah.
some high level things that really jumped out in the report, and then also what our call to action is going to be from the public representatives in Ireland and parents who need support as well. So I'll do a shared screen here. Okay. Share here. Can you see that okay?
Can see it now. Perfect.
Excellent. So this is under, if you just really, anyone can just Google it or put it in CAS report, it comes up. It's cas.independent-review.uk. And this is the CAS report, the final one. And you'll also see the interim one. So Dr. Hilary Cass is a retired consultant pediatrician who worked, I believe, worked with the NHS or for them. And that was she started this report was commissioned in 2020 to do a full report and look at the gender services for children and young people. And following the commissioning in 2020, she put out an interim report in 2022. And that report in 2022 is what caused the Tavistock Gender Affirming Care Clinic to close down. And that hit the news, I think, probably around July 2022, I believe. And Ireland was sending over children. We don't have any kind of gender affirming clinic here. In Ireland, children were being referred over to the Tavistock. And even after this report came out, the interim report in 2022, and after the Tavistock was ordered to close, basically for lack of a better word, malpractice, children in Ireland were still being referred over to the Tavistock. So that is really shocking that despite the evidence and the dangers and risks, Ireland were still referring children over to the Tavistock. So this is the report here. You'll see the final report here. Again, that's the website there. Tells a little bit about it. There's also the interim report you can read, and then you can download the final report, which is over 300 pages for anyone that wants some nice nighttime reading. And it just tells, this is kind of a summary, tells the context of the report, what drove the report, and then there's an overview of key findings here. We've looked at the overview here, and there's a few that really jump out. So the one that really jumps out here is, while a considerable amount of research has been published in this field, systematic evidence reviews demonstrated the poor quality of the published studies, meaning there is not a reliable evidence base upon which to make clinical decisions or for children and their families to make informed choices. So what that is saying really directly is that there isn't enough evidence to prove what's been happening, prescribing children with the puberty blockers, the cross-sex hormones, surgeries. There's not enough evidence to make proper clinical-based decisions. So, and for families to make informed choices. So they also mentioned, Lisa, I think you saw about somewhere in the report, they don't talk about the detransitioning at all. The Tavistock didn't really talk about that process of all the people that regret it. I'll just see if I can dig that up, but.
And just to say on the research there, I think in the report itself, they found 53 reports on puberty blockers, and found that 52 of them are of poor or low quality. So we're not talking about an area where it was well researched and clinicians could have had any confidence whatsoever that what they were doing was either safe or effective.
Wow. So families couldn't make informed decisions.
No.
They were being referred over. I know through we were looking into what's the journey, and we don't have all the details of the whole journey of an Irish child being referred over, but there is a Children's Health Ireland, which is Crumlin Hospital. It looks like they go through Crumlin Hospital to get referred over, but it did say in the news this week, which I'll refer to in a moment, it talks about the number of children in Ireland who were referred, but also put on puberty blockers prescribed through Children's Health Ireland, which is Crumlin. So from that article, it looks like Crumlin is prescribing puberty blockers for Irish children here. So this is just an overview. So it starts again, it has the review, key findings, and then the summary of recommendations. So I encourage everyone to just at your leisure, just read through this detail. Just seeing what else really stood out here. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, this is.
So they had a very little follow through, Jana, with patients. We don't really know how they got on. And I think what's really telling is when Cass, when they were trying to dive into this and see what's going on, none of the adult gender clinics would share information with Cass. So Cass was set up, Cass report or investigation by the NHS, and those adult clinics refused to work with Cass to find out, to let the public know what was going on. So I think that's very, very telling.
Yeah, it is. If someone is hiding information, it's only logical to ask, why are they hiding information? What are they hiding? Why aren't they so forthcoming with that? And this is interesting here. It says the option to provide masculinizing and feminizing hormones from age 16 is available, but the review recommends extreme caution. There should be a clear clinical rationale for providing hormones at this stage, rather than waiting until an individual reaches 18. So every case considered for medical treatment should be discussed at a national multidisciplinary team, MDT. So what that's saying is, yes, there are hormones available for 16, but they absolutely should be extreme caution and reviewed by a medical team, whereas that is not happening today. I was reading different testimonials or different things online that children were referred to Tavistock. Some of them had like a 15-20 minute conversation, sometimes 1 or 2 appointments, and then given after a couple appointments, given life-altering drugs that have been proven that they aren't clinically trialed properly. They're experimental. We don't have long-term studies on them. And there wasn't a team to look at that case. So if little Johnny gets sent over to Tavistock, they're recommending that, or whatever gender clinic replaces it, that should be no use of hormones until they're 18, unless extremely in extenuating circumstances, and in that case reviewed by a team, not just some gender doctor getting commission going, here, take these blockers and hormones, which sounds like that's what was happening. So that's kind of an over level. Is there anything you want me to pull up, Lisa? I know you read some of the 388 pages. Anything on the final report that we wanted to touch on or bring up? Or
I think a really, really important thing to look at here is, well, 2 things really. So Tavistock, this was set up in 1989, a clinic for gender dysphoria. It was set up when there was less than 10 children per year were presenting in a rather large country with gender dysphoria. So I find that very interesting that there was less than 10, and we know that a few decades later, there's an absolute explosion in the gender dysphoria world. And what did they know in 1989 that, how did they know this was going to happen? Because it wasn't happening in less than 10 children, yet we set up a special clinic just for them, or they did in the UK. And back then, then that leads really to I think one of the issues at the heart of this report. And back in the day, back in 1989 and previous, who was presenting for gender dysphoria was prepubescent boys by large, and middle-aged or older men. That's who were presenting with gender dysphoria. And who, the main treatment back in 1989 for these boys was therapeutic. And then a small percentage of those less than 10 boys a year eventually went on to get hormones around age 16, but that's a small percentage of less than 10. So I don't know, is that 2 boys a year? Once they hit 16, might have gotten those drugs. And what Cass really flags is that between the numbers start increasing, but what really stands out along with the increase in numbers is we flip who's presenting. And suddenly around 2014 to 2015, we have an explosion of teenage girls who never had any gender dysphoria growing up when they were young, presenting with gender dysphoria. And the Tavistock clinic exhibited no curiosity whatsoever why suddenly they had girls, and there was no curiosity, there was no interest, there was no thought perhaps we need to look into the cause, and there was no thought that perhaps the same treatment model does not apply to girls. So I think that that's really telling. And
I have the report up here.
A lot of reasons.
I'm skimming through the report. It is very long, so it's something that we could nearly probably do another discussion on highlights from the report, because it is nearly 300 pages long. So it has, I mean, it just shows, I suppose I'll exit out of the report, but it just shows a 300-page report with all that detail, like you said, Lisa, about, it went from boys to girls, and it went from only a few a year to thousands. What was that change? They didn't really care, because I know when we did a podcast last year, myself and Sarah on the Wonder Woman podcast, we talked to Scott Nugent, who was the accidental star of Matt Walsh, What is a Woman? And Scott conveyed a figure that was absolutely astonishing, that each child who is confused with their gender and gets led down the path for this change is worth between $1 and $1.5 million for the pharmaceutical and the medical industry. Not to mention that in addition to all the puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries that cost money, they have lifelong health problems. So they become a permanent pharmaceutical medical patient. And to top it all off, their lifespan reduces by quite a large percent. So they probably will never make it to pension age. So government doesn't have to pay pension on these poor children, because they're not going to live to be, 65. And also a high percentage, most of them will not go on to have their own children, because they've been sterilized and castrated medically or surgically. They won't have children, so they can't procreate. So it affects the population if they can't procreate, if all these kids are going down the path, and it affects the pension won't have to be paid. So that saves money. Not that our government would do anything so sinister as that, but that is what's happening. It's not out of the kindness and it's certainly not under kindness and inclusivity to make children think they're born in the wrong body and pop them full of drugs and give them surgeries. That's just not good at all. What else did I make a note of? So Keira Bell as well. There's a high court case. Anyone listening can look up Keira, Keira Bell. She took a high court case against the Tavistock, challenging their practices, and was so relieved to say, I saw in an article that this will prevent a lot of children being given unnecessary puberty blockers. So, I believe that if you look at all the children that were harmed through the Tavistock, I think in Ireland was it over 200 children were
over
sent
200%. And there's did we just read? There's about 70 Irish children were on the waiting list for Tavistock when it was shut down. So those 70 children might have had a narrow escape there, because I suppose for people who haven't read the report, the thrust of it is that it wasn't good clinical practice. We didn't have the evidence to give them the drugs and the surgery. And what they're saying now is pull back, have a multidisciplinary team have either a pediatrician or a psychologist who is responsible for the clinical care of that one child. Each child is to be treated as an individual. So we don't all affirm, there isn't one path for everyone. Individual, and it's holistic. Everything about the child, their social, psycho, situation is going to be looked at. And we know from Eugene, who you've done amazing podcasts with, we did one, the three of us at one point, that these children have an incredible amount of comorbidities. Autism. In October of 2022, the Gender Clinic in Dublin claimed that 90% of the patients presenting were autistic, so they have so many comorbidities, and Cass is saying everything needs to be looked at. We can't say we have an unhappy, confused child, know that they have 6 or 7 comorbidities, but just focus on the one that leads to sterilization, mutilation, and irreversible, medical outcomes.
And this came out in the Irish Independent just on the 11th of April. I was saying, what's our report? It's actually a report there, a report produced in England. That's what we just reviewed. And it did say there are currently fewer than 10 children in Ireland being prescribed puberty blockers by CHI, which is in Crumlin. So currently there are 10 children or fewer than 10 in this country who have been or being prescribed these untested, experimental, dangerous, irreversible drugs here in Ireland.
But Jana, I think what we need to point out is we don't know that those are the only children being prescribed.
These are being prescribed them in Crumlin. There could be another, if they don't go to Crumlin, is there another few hundred kids?
Yeah, by GPs. So as we were chatting about before we got started here, Gript Media and the Countess have highlighted the fact that the Royal College of Surgeons had up on their website a document that they produced with Tenny on the care of gender dysphoria in children. And the document, apparently, no, I didn't read it because they've since taken it off their website and haven't answered Gript, indicated that GP should contact Tenny, who are radical trans activists, not medical people, activists, about the care of these confused and vulnerable and troubled children. So my question is, are these children being treated off-label by their GP pursuant to the Royal College of Surgeons and Tenny? And Deputy Tobin in 2021 did put the question to the Minister of Health in the Dáil, what is the situation with prescribing puberty blockers? And the Minister of Health did go on to say that they can be prescribed off-label. So this could be a sleight of hand.
And that sounds, Lisa, like I know you've done some fantastic work with the Freedom of Information Act request to the NCCA, which I know has been an ongoing process. We'll do another chat to update everyone on that. But they're trying to hide information to show us that parents were involved with the curriculum consultation. We know that parents weren't involved, but this would be another good FOIA to maybe do to the HSE to say how many children were prescribed puberty blockers here in Ireland, be it through the CHI or independent clinics, or how many children were sent to the Tavistock who prescribed them. So could be another few hundred. I mean, this could really unravel that. Could be hundreds or thousands of children in Ireland harmed by these irreversible puberty blockers. This article here just goes on to again say it was the report found the remarkably weak evidence. And then Ireland does not run its own dedicated healthcare service for transgender children, and many are referred abroad for treatment. Well, I would argue there are not any transgender children. There are children who may be confused, but there are not transgender children. And then it says here in the past, yes, Irish children were referred to Tavistock in London, which had to close. More than 70, as you said, Lisa, were on the waiting list. Let's see here. Anything else in the Irish Independent that sticks out here? Of course, BelongTo. They're probably getting a little bit twitchy now with this report now coming out. I'd say they're panicking that maybe their funding could be affected. So BelongTo, Ireland's national organization supporting LGBTQ plus people, said the cast review had identified some failings and many opportunities for learning. So,
it identified so much more.
So much more.
Like, that's
they really
just
underplayed that, didn't they? And then it says
gaslighting in the extreme.
Yes, and then look at this here. This is quite funny. Belong To, which again is a radical trans right activist group, which is an NGO with no medical qualifications. They're going to conduct an analysis of the cast review to better inform our understanding of the care for trans young people. So they're obviously getting very twitchy. Belong To and Tenny, Mermaids, all these ones who push children down the path, transition children, recruited children to go down the path to take the drugs, which now the cast report has shown were unethical, not good practices, and seriously a risk for children. So that's one article, and then there's
I'm just sorry to cut across you, Jana. It's clearly stated in the cast report that the majority of these children do not require medical treatment. It is stated clearly. So, I think that Dr. Cass worded this report carefully. But, the gist of it is the gig is up here. These children, there's going to be malpractice suits worldwide coming out of Cass, as there well should be. Absolutely. Not because, it's great to go around suing, but it is a tool to be used to teach governments and doctors and medical organizations, if you go ahead and you injure children, there will be consequences.
Exactly. And, you remember back, if we rewind back to, I can't remember when the swine flu thing broke. It must have been, I think I bought a property that year and I think I got really sick and they thought I had swine flu. 2007, I think, was swine flu. And that was pushed, that injection, just like the COVID injection, the swine flu injection was pushed onto all the children to take it, to keep them safe from the swine flu. And then it was rushed, experimental, and lots of children got narcolepsy. And if anybody wants to look it up for themselves, you can just look up swine flu lawsuit, narcolepsy or something. There's a few cases and they go into the millions in damages at this point, but it took about 15 years to get that compensation.
Yeah, over a decade.
Over a decade for parents.
And I suspect they cleaned that up, Jana, just before COVID to get that out of the way, because the parallels between I believe the swine flu was a little mini test run for COVID, see what works, see what doesn't. And I don't know if people recall that Tony Houlihan was the man running the swine flu debacle. And he was on, I believe, the Late Late Show years after, and it was well known that the children got narcolepsy, which is a devastating, lifetime, no cure disease. And he said he wouldn't do anything different. So
and that was right around the time when Tony Houlihan was involved in the cervical smear scam, which many women are now either dead or very sick from. So between the swine flu, the cervical one, and now this puberty blocker one, the COVID injection one, I mean, do we really trust the health service here? This needs to be really scrutinized. This is another article that came out, I found, from November 2023. HSE paid €130,000 for 29 people to undergo gender reassignment ops outside the state, funding 41 trips abroad. Now, we didn't see any ages here, so that's interesting. It just has, it includes surgery of the face, chest, and genitalia to provide the transgender person with a body that aligns with their self-identified gender. And then it states that there were 11 patients going in 2020, and then another 9 in 2021.
Jenna, that's got to just be their travel costs. That cannot cover the surgeries, multiple massive surgeries. So, this is the travel cost. This isn't.
It must be just the travel. Yeah, because the surgeries would cost much more than that, I can imagine. Yeah. So if we took 131,000, my math is too tired on this Saturday night to figure it out, but 29,000 into that, it would definitely probably only be the travel. It says who traveled abroad a total of 41 times for surgery. So that must just be the travel cost. That's flights and hotels and food and whatever else. But yeah, so this just shows that, our tax money here in Ireland paid through the HSE for people to travel to undergo gender surgery on their face, genitals,
While
and
we
bodies
have people, 4,000
for
homeless
scoliosis.
children,
Yeah.
14,000 homeless people. And they just announced, I think it was today, or perhaps it was yesterday, in Canada, a man has sued the Canadian government. Did you see this? For the right to have a neo vagina inserted, or surgically inserted into himself while retaining his male genitalia. So the government is paying for that, and the Canadian government, at the meantime, if you're depressed and you're a vet, you will be, if you ask for help from the government, from the medical community, you will be offered euthanasia. So, if you're depressed, you're, disabled, you will be offered euthanasia. But if you want new sex
Yeah.
organs,
That's free for all.
that will be paid for. Yes. So,
and there's other countries that I know are children, they're trying to reduce the age where children can go and get their gender reassignments done, and parents do not have a say in it. So kids who are 16 can go over to a clinic and say, hey, remove this and give me this drug and turn me into whatever. And it's driving really that the children having the rights. They're saying it's all under the child rights. But imagine a child who's not even old enough to get a tattoo or vote or drive a car, being able to go and make these life-altering decisions. So it's just crazy that this is all happening. I never thought 10 years ago. Did you think 10 years ago as a mom you'd be reading about children going to remove body parts and people thinking that it's all kind and inclusive?
No, I didn't have a clue. And I was doing an LLM in children in the law in UCC back 10, 11 years ago, and was reading about the UN rights of the children and all of these things. And, it didn't it always appears to be on the side of kindness and protecting children. And what we didn't realize is it was all a smokescreen, and it's all to get at the children. Because if they have rights, if they consent, if they can, at 16 or younger, make medical decisions, they're going to keep dropping that down to the point where there is no age of consent. Babies, we have the UN telling us that babies are sexual. And this is based on research of John Money back in, what was it, the 50s. And he relied on the detailed notes of a pedophile for his assertion that babies are sexual. It's sick. But here we are all these years later, and we actually have, policies and laws and, conventions and whatnot on the basis that, children are sexual, therefore they have sexual rights.
Yeah. And that came up, you made the podcast that Eugene and I did. We've done part 1, 2, and we're just about to release part 3, but I think it was on part 2. If you look on, anyone listening can look on the Natural Women's Council YouTube channel. And we have a series, we're doing queering of the Irish education. And part 2 showed that children were born sexual, and they proved that children were born sexual by recording by age of the child the number of orgasms they could give a child in a 24-hour period. So some kids were forced and had 20 orgasms and were screaming, and they were celebrating that kids are sexual, and they had orgasms at age 4. Well, I'm sorry, but that child was probably being sexually abused, screaming in pain. Screaming in pain. That's child abuse. And that's what some of the education in Ireland is being based on, is the theory from people who think that that's okay. So I guess, the CAS report it's great to have this discussion to share with people, what the report was about, and the risks and the lawsuit risks that are going to come. But the call to action, just, people may say, well, what can we do about it? How is this going to drive an action in our society here in Ireland? And I know met right after the CAS report, had a lot of discussions in the groups that we work with, and we're going to be sending a very detailed letter to all TDs, ministers, senators, and the children's ombudsman here in Ireland to say we are asking for the immediate stop of prescribing children here in Ireland with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, stop it immediately, and give them a copy of the CAS report, a copy of all the data, a copy of the risks, and back it up with all the data to say this needs to stop. And they can't ignore it. I mean, we will send them all the information and showing the risks and dangers to children. In addition, the CAS report is gold standard. They can't ignore it. To ignore it would be complicit and ignoring child abuse.
Yeah.
And harm
Yeah,
to
they had
children.
plausible deniability, Jana, prior to the CAS report, perhaps. I mean, I wouldn't even say they did really, but they could claim that. But now that this report is out, there is no standing over what this is. Child abuse. This is medical experimentation, a la the Nazis, without informed consent on children. There is no other way of looking at it. I think it's nicely worded in the CAS report, and I understand why Dr. Cass put it in that terminology, but you don't have to read between the lines to see what it really was. They were experimenting on children.
Experimenting on children. And, I read years ago I read in Ireland about there was some abuse at I think the Magdalene laundries. There was some cases where they did test maybe vaccines on children who were in that care. And that people were in uproar about that, going, how can this happen? How can children be experimented on? Well, look what's happening now. It's being promoted and celebrated, and giving children experimental vaccines to attempt to change their gender. I mean, why aren't people in an uproar about this? And I think they will be once the report gets more publicized. But the other thing people need to accept is, Hilary Cass is a retired consultant pediatrician, and this report took years of research and studies. People just need to accept that this report now is gold standard. What are they going to do? Argue this report and say, sorry, that's not good enough. We're going to do our own to prove that puberty blockers and hormones and surgeries are safe for children, and scrap the CAS report? I mean, this has to be accepted as gold standard.
So many people are on a gravy train here, whether they're in the activism world, they're in the NGOs, they're in the medical world, they're in the pharmaceutical world. As we're aware, our current Minister for Justice, who is trying to silence us all with the hate speech bill, his husband works for the Irish company that produces the puberty blockers. So, that is a serious conflict of interest. And she is trying to silence us all, both on her pet, immigration policy and with regards to, puberty blockers in children. So, they covered all the bases, but there is no standing over.
There's no standing over it now. I mean, the CAS report's gold standard. And I don't see how the likes of the trans right activist groups like Tenny and BelongTo can even argue the CAS report. They're an NGO. They're a group of activists, political activists. They're not doctors. They can't possibly challenge those, dozens and dozens of studies and data that were presented by Dr. Hilary Cass. It's
they'll show their true colors, Jana. If they come out and they try to criticize this and say that this, report shouldn't be followed, this report, which clearly for every word is written to protect children and, isn't biased and said there was toxicity on both sides. And at the end of the day, all of a sudden we were treating children with gender dysphoria in a manner we didn't treat any other children with regards to any medical complaints. Let's get it back on track. Let's look at all their issues. If they are going to come out and say that this isn't right, this is wrong, and we shouldn't follow this, there's no going back from them. And then if they do admit that the CAS report is accurate and needs to be followed, they're blown out of the water. They don't exist anymore. And we need to be going to our schools as well and saying to all the schools that invite BelongTo, which is, I think, about approximately 88% of our secondary schools, and they are now gunning for our primary schools. We need to say to our principals and our teachers and the parents in the school, this stops
dangerous
here.
This has to stop.
Says no, stop.
Exactly.
She spent 4 years studying it. She's a pediatrician. She had a team. She had no agenda. She is protecting the children. It stops now.
Yep. So I think in addition to, the letter that we're going to send to all the TD senators, ministers, and children's ombudsman. That's one aspect of getting those puberty blockers and hormones stopped here. Senator Michael McDowell spoke out about it on his website and on Twitter. You can see he's speaking out, which is great because he's very influential. People listen to him. He's very credible. There also needs to be, like you said, the campaign. We need to have maybe provide some. We did a Belong To podcast on the Natural Women's Council YouTube, and anyone can look at the Belong To podcast. And we also currently have a Belong To campaign. So the Natural Women's Council website is currently underway, but the Belong To campaign is on the IrishEducationAlliance.com website. And that Belong To campaign, I'll just pull it up for everyone to see. There's a letter that people can send to schools. I'm just going to pull that up here now. While we're talking, there's a letter that people can send to their schools. So I'm just going to share the screen to show everybody where that is, because I would not want Belong To in my school promoting transgenderism for children and leading them down a path of puberty blockers when we clearly can see that they're dangerous. So there's a Belong To campaign. So on the IrishEducationAlliance.com site, you'll see all the different campaigns we have going at the moment. Belong To campaign here. So there's email the following letters to principal, board of management, copy TDs, and counselors. So it basically is a letter that we have written in partnership with Lawyers for Justice Ireland, Parents' Rights Alliance, and Irish Education Alliance. We wrote this letter to talk about the concern with Belong To, their quality mark program, secondary schools it was happening, who is Belong To, talks about them. Belong To is teacher trainers, some of those risks, the social contagion aspect, the conclusion. So,
and I think the part there where we're talking about Belong To are not medical people. They're not medically trained, and yet they're calling the shots with regards to gender dysphoria and how it must be handled and what we can and can't actually talk about. That is so relevant to the CAS report, because
absolutely
that's how we ended up needing a CAS report, because the radical activists controlled this world of gender dysphoria up until this week.
Yep, that's perfect. And the other thing is, this letter, probably we can update it because it does talk about the stand-up week from last November, which is done and gone now. Some schools did back out of doing it once they saw the risks. Others carried ahead. But there's also in this lots of references in the letter to share with your school. So a lot of really credible articles there. This is the email that we sent as well to all secondary schools in a press release to talk about the risks that Belong To. I know we also sent all of the people who fund Belong To. Personally, I sent them an email from the Natural Women's Council to say, you're funding Belong To. Here are the concerns with Belong To. So anyone who funds them got a letter. Every school got a letter. Every TD senator got a letter. But Belong To still made their way into schools to promote this LGBTQI, push kids down the path of transgenderism and confusing children, making them think they're in the wrong body to take those drugs that clearly the CAS report shows have harmed children. So much work to be done, but this is
good. This is a good news story, Cass.
It's a great news story.
And there's so many people who've gone before us and have worked so hard on this for years, trying to point out the harm that was being done and being called a bigot and transphobe and to shut up, and you don't have a right to speak, and let us at your children and be quiet was the message, and no more. They cannot get away with that. There are children, and nobody is born in the wrong body. There is no such thing as a trans child.
Not at all. And I'm just going to pull up one final thing before we conclude. Another resources. This is a great website here, Transgender Trend, which their motto is "No child is born in the wrong body." And I found some statistics on here. I can't remember what tab it is now, but it had somewhere people can look for themselves on here, but it had that over 80% of children who present with gender confusion, over 80%, once they go through puberty and everything, after that, they don't identify in any way as a different sex or gender. They completely get through it. They go, comfortable in their own skin. The other 20% may need, more counseling, therapy, guidance on that. But most of them, the puberty is the solution. So this has
a bit to get them through puberty. Puberty is a human right. You know,
Puberty is a
every
human right.
child has a human right to go through puberty. If we want to talk about rights, do
Exactly.
not block their puberty. Those are irreversible drugs that they're giving to children.
And the other thing is, this is under treatments here, the social transition. So something just before we go, I think it's really important as well to talk about the social transition risk. So teachers who are pushing, they're asked to introduce themselves using pronouns and refer to children as different pronouns like they, them, him, her, or whatever ones they want to choose. A social transition is actually gender affirmation. It's actually the practices of affirmation, social transition, chest binding, etc. They're promoted as harmless as they don't involve any medical treatment. However, this article here, if anyone wants to, talk about or look at the social transition, go under treatments and side effects, social transition, it's not safe to use those pronouns and change children's pronouns or suggest chest binders. It may not be a drug or surgery, but social transition is the first step to leading them down this very dangerous path.
Yeah.
So that's a really good website.
The CAS report, I believe the interim report stated that social transitioning is not a neutral event. You can't say, well, there's no harm in that. There actually is.
There is
And
harm.
then if you put them on the puberty blockers, that is a gateway drug to the cross-sex hormones. I think 97.5% of children were given puberty blockers go on to take cross-sex hormones. So it's all, a gateway to something bigger.
It all needs to stop. No puberty blockers for children, no cross-sex hormones, no pronouns, no social transitions, no belong to in school. Keep political activists and ideology out of school. And this is also going to be part of our campaign, our biggest campaign yet, launching this month with the school curriculum, because the primary school consultation is open until June 7th. So they want to push these ideologies. Roderick O'Gorman stated they want to bring transgender issues into the primary school classroom. So think of age 5 being taught about transgenderism when they probably can't even read, a lot of kids at age 5 yet. They've just learned their alphabet. They want to teach them transgender issues. Clearly, they're not mentally, emotionally mature enough to handle those. So this all just needs to stay right out of school. And the campaign we're launching this month, which is going to be forming the NCCA submission that we're doing. We're going to give parents a template to use for the NCCA primary school submission. We're going to have a letter with the curriculum for parents to send to TDs and schools to really push back on it. And the other thing that's really important for people listening is opting out isn't going to even be an option anymore. It's going to be pointless. You can opt out under the Education Act, anything that goes against your moral conscience. But this stuff is going to be sprinkled and threaded into all the different subjects. It's going to just, I described, it's going to explode like glitter in the classroom, and it's going to be in history and math and everywhere else. So it needs to completely be scrapped. And that's what our campaign will be asking, is that the whole curriculum that revolves around the gender ideology, the indoctrination, sexualization, social justice, all of that needs to be scrapped. No compromise. So that's what our campaign will be launching this month. Very, very exciting campaign, lots of work, and there's all hands on deck getting it done, but we'll support the public in pushing back and hopefully get it across all the counties in the country. So that's great, Lisa. Well, that's great. We'll sign off now and enjoy the rest of our Saturday night. So thanks very much for that. To talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.